Right now, if you walked into my backyard, here's what you'd see: a deck with wind chimes going, an herb garden, wildflower beds that have gotten a little wild, but on purpose, raised beds of tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, a few makeshift beds of cucumbers, squash, and pumpkins that honestly take over more ground than we planned for, roses, blackberry, a shed the previous owners painted bright red, a patio wrapped in grapevines with a table, umbrella, and fireplace, and another patio made of big square pavers that the wildflowers have basically reclaimed for themselves. And birds, bees, butterflies, hummingbirds at the basil, monarchs on the milkweed by late summer, all day long, something is moving through that yard. 3 years ago, none of that was true. 3 years ago, it was an overgrown garden bed and a greenhouse that looked like it was going to fall over in the next strong wind. That's it. That was the whole ecosystem. This is another one of my bird and garden episodes. If you've been listening for a while, you know I come back to this a lot because our backyard keeps teaching me things I need to hear about how I build my business and how the people I work with build theirs. Hi, I'm Renee Coster, learning experience designer and consultant. This is the Learning Experience Design for Changemakers podcast. And if you love learning about how to build immersive and sticky learning, stay around because that's what this is all about. Here's the idea I want us to sit with today. If you build it, they will come. But it doesn't need to be perfect before they show up. Our garden is like a learning ecosystem. I don't mean that as a cute metaphor that I'm reaching for. I mean the actual mechanics of how that yard grew are the same mechanics I use with clients when we're building a course, a membership, or an audience. So let me walk through what actually happened year by year, and then I want to connect the dots for you. When we moved in, the very first decision we made before we planted a single thing was no pesticides. Full stop. We knew we wanted to grow food eventually, and there were already blackberries growing on the property. So that mattered to us. But notice what that decision actually was. It wasn't a plan for what the garden would look like, it was a boundary about what we would never do to get there. Then we tackled the mess that was already in front of us. There was one garden bed that had gone completely overgrown, and we cleared it out and turned it into a small stone patio. That was basically it for year one. We didn't have a design, we didn't have a 5 year plan. We made space and we set a rule. And that first year, quiet. Not many birds, not many bees, not many butterflies, if any. If you'd asked me that summer whether any of this was working, I would have suggested and said, ask me again next year. I think this is exactly where a lot of us quit on a business idea, a course, an audience, one quiet season, and we decide the whole thing must have been a bad idea. We tear it down and start over, or we just stop. What I'd ask you to consider is that quiet doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes quiet just means year one. The following year is when things actually started to shift. We started growing tomatoes and peppers. We took out the greenhouse. It was genuinely in danger of collapsing. It wasn't earning its space anymore. It had become a liability more than an asset. And we filled that spot with stone. Still no pesticides, no exceptions. And we planted more flowers, but not just any flowers, perennials, natives, wildflowers, the specific plants that pollinators are actually looking for, not just the ones that looked pretty at the garden center. Bee balm, more mint, milkweed for the monarchs. And that's when we started seeing wildlife. Not a flood of it, and definitely not overnight, but a real noticeable shift. After a full year of living there, we were finally starting to get visitors. Here's the part that I really want you to catch because it's easy to hear that story and think, oh, so the flowers brought the bees. Sure, partly. But the visitors showed up not just because of what we put in, they showed up because of what we took out, that dangerous greenhouse, and because of what we refused to introduce in the first place, which was the pesticides. What you remove and what you refuse matters just as much as what you add. That's true in a garden. It's absolutely true in business. And it is 100% true in a learning experience. Think about the last program, training, or course you built, or the last time you tried to grow an audience. How much of your energy went into adding more content, more modules, more posts, more features, one more offer versus how much went into deciding what you were never going to do? Or did you go the opposite way and burn it all down and start from scratch? Instead of thinking, what were you going to remove because it wasn't earning its space anymore, the way that greenhouse wasn't, and keep the rest, like the blackberries. I hear this constantly from the people I work with. Something isn't working, and their first instinct is either to one, add more, or two, burn it down. On the one hand, more content, more bonuses, more touch points. But content isn't what fixes an ecosystem that's out of balance. Sometimes the actual fix is pulling out the thing that's collapsing and refusing to reach for the pesticide, the quick fix, the passive income promise, the hustle energy tactic, even when it would be easier, faster looking choice. On the other side, they burn it all down instead of, again, finding the thing that's not working, removing just that, and enhancing the things that are working within the program. Now, 3 years in, we've got the full picture I described at the top of the episode. But here's what matters most. Even once the birds and bees and butterflies started showing up regularly, we didn't stop. We don't plan to stop. We kept adding perennials. We kept pulling out what wasn't working. We're still out there most weekends, more often than not, with dirt under our nails. Our garden is not passive. It requires ongoing work. And I already have plans for next summer. Same thing with learning ecosystems. They require ongoing work. Sometimes you work on the course. Sometimes you work on your lead magnet, but you work on them all continuously. That's the piece I think people skip past. They imagine the goal is to reach some finished state where the audience finally shows up and then you're done. You never have to look at it again and you can just coast. But an ecosystem doesn't have a finish line. It has seasons. It builds up over time and it evolves. And this is the part that matters. People will show up and move through it along the way, not just once it's completed, along the journey in every season, including the quiet ones. And that is fantastic because it's those people who show up along the journey that are going to help you continue to tend that learning ecosystem. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. If you're building or rebuilding a course, membership, training, or even an audience of your own, you do not need everything in place before you're allowed to begin. You do not need everything in place before you're allowed to begin. You don't need the fancy platform, the perfect content library, every module recorded and polished. What you need first is a boundary. Your vision of no pesticides, the thing you're refusing to do to get there. And then you need to make space for the right thing. That's roots. That's knowing your current reality and drawing your line before you plant anything. Some seasons will be quiet, And that's not a verdict on whether the whole thing is working. That first year of almost no visitors wasn't a sign we were failing. It was just the first year. If your first season is quiet, that doesn't mean scrap it and start from scratch. It might just mean you're still in year one, and year two is when the perennials start doing their work. And when people do start showing up, when you finally get that first bit of traction, that is not the finish line either. That's your sign to keep tending, keep adding what belongs, keep removing what doesn't earn its space anymore, keep refusing what you already know isn't you, no matter how tempting it looks like on someone else's watch. So here's what I want you to sit with this week. What's the one thing you've refused to bring into your business, even when it would have been an easier choice? And where are you now? Are you still in that first quiet year or finally starting to see the pollinators show up? I'd genuinely love to know. Come and find me and tell me. If this one landed for you, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps this reach the next person who's waiting to feel ready before they start. And if you want a framework for building your own learning ecosystem step by step, the roots, the journey, the milestones, all of it, that's exactly what the Roots to Canopy design method is for. Best place to start is on my newsletter. You can go to reneecoster.com/newsletter and sign up. Thanks for spending this time in the garden with me. I'll see you next episode.